our present political class and commentators and all that thing is that they don't believe in anything. Western civilization is disintegrating because it's got to that sort of stage and retreating. You know, to say that his religion is a religion of peace is, well, it's nonsense, really. Islam is going to take over the planet. It's as simple as that. And Lord Ahmed threatened to put 10,000 Muslims into an army to march on the House of Lords and the Parliament and destroy it and all that. And, you know, we're obviously going to go through a very uncomfortable period of socialism. It's a great privilege to be able to ask questions at the Lords. You know, written questions are terribly valuable because government has to answer them. Certainly the violent end of Islam is evil.
Information covered up, censorship, corruption. The mainstream media have proven itself to be untrustworthy. I'm here to give a platform for debate, for truth, for open discussion. I'm introducing you to my podcast, Silenced with Tommy Robinson.
Who exactly is Tommy Robinson, or Stephen Yaxley-Lennon?
With the English Defence League, the EDL.
The problem is with Islamic
The
integration.
English far-right Islamophobic activists.
Since then, there's been organised protests across the country in London, Manchester, Leeds. People in their thousands are marching for Robinson's release.
There is no such thing in this country as a Muslim.
Free Tommy Robinson!
Welcome to my latest edition of my podcast, Silenced. I'm here today in the House of Lords with Lord Pearson. Lord Pearson, thank you very much.
Good morning.
For joining me. I was just going to introduce to say that since Winston Churchill, I don't think there's anyone who has stood in Parliament or the House of Lords that's been brave enough to challenge or question Islam and the teachings of Islam other than yourself. So I think you'll be a fabulous guest to sit down and talk to and for the public to understand who you are. So first of all, Lord Pearson, where was you born?
I was born in Devizes in Wiltshire in the middle of the Second World War in 1942, and things were pretty uncomfortable. My earliest memories are the doodlebugs flying over and everyone rushing for cover when these were the German bombs that came and you could hear them coming. But if you heard the engine stop, you knew the damn thing was going to fall, so everyone had to run for cover. So I think that's one of my earliest memories is the doodlebugs flying over Devizes.
How old was you then, do you think?
Well, 2.
2, okay.
3.
Yeah.
I mean, when does one's earliest memories start?
Yeah.
Around then, I think.
Yeah. And your family at that time?
Well,
mum, dad?
My father was a self-made insurance broker. He fought in the First War in the Royal Flying Corps. He volunteered for the Royal Flying Corps and survived, which was, the death rate in the Flying Corps was higher than it was in the trenches. And as a result of being in the world of the air, which was new in 1918, he teamed up with a number of other people who'd been his mates in the Flying Corps, and Hudson Fish and various other people who went off to start their national airlines, because there weren't any national airlines before. And because he had been in insurance just before the war, he became a pioneer of aviation insurance. And that's really what made his life and his career, and, you know, enough money to send my brother and me to Eton, which was a great privilege, of course, in life. And yes, his first wife had been a member of the Courage family, and they had a son, my half-brother, who was, I've got a lot of his letters now. He was killed in Bomber Command, and killed towards the end of the war. And I don't really remember him at all. He's just sort of shadowy figure. But
how old was he when he was killed?
Ian was, well, he was 17 in 1939. So in 1944, he was, whatever it was, 22, 23. Yeah.
And how old was you at that time?
Well, I was 2.
Okay,
so 3 really.
Okay.
Three, yeah.
And he was killed in Bomber Command. And then, so your dad was obviously a very successful businessman.
Yes, yes, I think he was, as a pioneer of aviation insurance. I mean, thank goodness. And he founded, a firm with a friend of his called Harvey Bowring, which became the Bowring, and now Marsh Mac. It's a big insurance empire now, but it wasn't so big then. And that was his career in insurance.
You know, you said you went to Eton. What age did you go to Eton?
13.
At 13, okay.
Yes.
So, and that's till 18?
13. Well, I stayed on a bit because I was very keen to be captain of the football team, and I wasn't. So I stayed on till I was 19 in order to captain the football team and the squash team. I captained that too. I was very lucky in being good at games. My work was slightly below average, but enough to get by.
Did you board at the school?
Oh gosh, yes.
You did?
We all boarded in I think Eton had, I can't remember how many houses, 30 houses or something, each with about 40 boys in them, and a housemaster and a sort of dame who was a sort of lady who looked after us all. So, yeah, no, we boarded, and we were very lucky. I mean, at Eton we had our own room right from the start. We didn't go and sleep in dormitories and things, which...
Do you mind if I ask, at the age of 13, because I think of my daughter now at 13, I think of my son as well, who's a mummy's boy. What's it like to, I'm guessing when you go and live for a term, do you? Do you go home at weekends? Do you stay there Monday to Friday?
No.
How does it work?
Well, I mean, it really starts at prep school, because that is much rougher. And I was actually sent to boarding school, prep school, when I was 7. That is very rough because you suddenly...
You need your mum.
Yeah, but my mum sent me, and I never really forgave her because I had this arrangement with her that she said, well, don't worry, darling, if you're unhappy, all you've got to do, in the letter you write her, every Sunday we had to write a letter home to our parents, but the letters were censored by this rather frightening lady who was in charge of the bottom form, the very youngest, and she said, all you've got, we knew, with my older brother, that we weren't allowed to say, I'm miserable, I hate this place, come and take me away, because that didn't get past the censor. But you were allowed to say, I am fairly happy. So I had this code with my mother. She said, don't worry, all you've got to do is write and say, I'm fairly happy, and I'll come and take you away immediately. I said, well, that's fine. So off I went. And she used to boast later, we used to joke, that she had 13 fairly happy letters in a row. So it was tough. No, it was very tough. We were very young. And a lot of us really should have stayed with our mothers, really. But we didn't. And there it is.
I couldn't get my head...
It's the public school system.
Yeah, what do you think that does? Because I'll ask, because I spoke at Harrow Boarding School, I gave a speech, and I met a young gentleman there, and he told me his story of this. And I said, but what does that stand you good for life, or do you think that detaches you from the loving part of your family, which is needed, I'd say, especially at that age?
Yeah, no, it can be damaging. I think it's known as, it's acknowledged now, I think it's called boarding school syndrome. I think there's a thing which I've looked up, and it's very, very common, especially amongst the British, because of course this system grew out of empire when parents went off to India and the rest of it and left their children to be, and Tom Brown's school days, all that sort of stuff. So the system grew out of that, and I think it's fine when you're 13 or 14. You actually probably quite want to get away from your family, and also by the time you get to your public school, which is at the age of 13, which in my case was Eton, many people they quite enjoyed it, but it is a mistake, and I think there's not so much of it. And anyway, the boarding schools now for the 7, 8, 9, 10 years are very different to what they were then.
Okay, so what did you come out of Eton with, grades wise, study wise? What did you?
Nothing much. I think 3 A levels or 4. I got Latin, French, English language, and English literature A level.
Okay.
I mean, it's not nothing, but it's, considering I really didn't do any work. So yes, yes.
And then when you left school, what path did you take?
Well,
when you
pretty
left?
well when I left school. I was very lucky. I went and, when I was 19, some friends of my mother were very sort of top Italians from the Fiat family, the Agnelli family, and Suni Agnelli, one of them, was she was actually looking for a German SS boy to come and whip her children into shape because they were all very spoiled. And this friend of my mother said, no, well, Malcolm's just left school and he's been in charge of the house at school. He understands discipline and that sort of stuff. So I went and did this as a sort of job. It wasn't really a job at all. For about a year in Italy with the sort of Fiat clan, the Suni Ratazzi. And
what are they? A big family?
It's a big family.
A very wealthy, an elite family.
They're still very, very well. They're a lovely family, but they're in the Fiat empire and they're still at it, and they're very good at it, and they do an awful lot of good work and that sort of stuff. No, they're great. And so I was very lucky to go to them, and so when I left that and I went into my father's office, I mean, there was, he said it's the army or the office, so I chose the office.
Your dad said it's the army and the office because it sounds like your dad, your granddad, your uncles all were military.
Yes. I think so many people were. Anyway, that's how it started. And I went into his insurance firm and then managed to purloin a couple of really bright people who were in there. John Webb and David Springbett, who I was terribly lucky because they had been told in those days, and we're talking about 1964 now, 63, 64, they had been told in this great firm that because they weren't a member of the family and they hadn't been to the right school, they would never be a director. So I said, well, come on, let's do it ourselves. So we set up our own company, PWS, Pearson, Webb, Springbett, and as reinsurance brokers. And it was a success. It took 20 years later, it went public, 1984.
Was your dad happy? So you worked for your dad's company?
Yeah.
Then with two people who you met there, you've gone and set up your own company?
Yeah.
Was your dad supportive of that?
Yes.
Okay.
He was privately rather proud of it.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, so you went up. You didn't take over his company.
No. We started entirely afresh.
Okay.
But because of my friendship and connection with the Fiat family and everything, I started doing some of their insurances in the London market, reinsurances and so on.
Okay.
And then there was a scandal because it was all quite fraudulent. There were a lot of ships that were sinking and the owners being paid when actually the ships hadn't been there in the first place and hadn't sunk. And if they had, they very often killed a few little brown crew people with them. And I was served up with one of these, a fraudulent claim, a claim I knew to be fraudulent, where for 301 motor cars, Fiat motor cars that were en route to North America. But the fraudsters in Fiat got hold of them and turned the ship round. They said they'd all been burnt. And so these 301 cars were sent off down to the Fiat agent in Naples, who was selling them on the open market at a sort of discount. And one of the directors of Fiat with whom I was, and who wasn't cut in on the scandal, he told me about it. So I then had the awkward position of having to collect this $1 million claim from Lloyd's underwriters from the London market, knowing it to be fraudulent. So I went and consulted John Matthew, a very senior lawyer, and he said, you must have nothing to do with it because you know it is fraud. And I knew it because I had a piece of paper given to me, one of the directors of Fiat, who actually wrote, who hadn't been cut in on the scam. So he gave me this piece of paper.
He told you.
These 301 cars, where are they? Naples. Are they damaged anyway? No. And so, so John Matthew, advised me not to pay it. So I refused to pay it. And we even bought one of the cars. We sent someone to Naples who bought one of the cars. It had a cigarette near it. It was absolutely perfect. And we stored it in Geneva in a garage so that we had and that became the sort of Savanita scandal, which, because in the end, I got sacked and...
You got sacked by the...
By the Fiat group.
Okay.
Yes. And because the man in charge of the whole Fiat group, the chairman, was rather a weak man, actually. A delightful man, but quite weak. And so the collection of the claim was given to the biggest brokers in London, Willis Faber, who had had the account before. I'd taken it away from them. And they forced it through the London market by sheer weight of account. They said, if you don't pay us, we'll never give you any business at all.
Again.
So my brave underwriters cracked and paid the thing. We actually paid 96% as a sort of compromise. And
well, even knowing it was fraudulent? Even knowing that it was fraudulent, they still paid it?
Oh yeah, they knew
because
by then.
They wanted to keep the business of the...
And I bumped into my old friend Jonathan Aitken, who I hadn't seen for some time, and he saying, what are you up to? And said, well, you're a journalist, Jonathan. I mean, say anything in this story of this claim. And Jonathan was onto it like a flash and made a very, very brave speech. He went to see the speaker, who said, gosh, and he fixed the Easter adjournment debate of 1983, I think.
The speaker of the House Commons.
House Commons, sorry. George, what was he called? George, anyway, George. And he, Tony Pandy. Okay. And he gave, and he fixed it so that Jonathan made the Easter adjournment debate in the Commons under privilege. And then the whole thing burst, went mild. It became a very, very big scandal. And
okay, yeah. So come a big scandal. And can I ask, is this what brought you to the attention of Margaret Thatcher?
Yes.
This was so you stood up against the fraud. You stood up against the biggest corporations.
Yeah, that's how I met her.
Okay.
Because there was a box. She used to get very bored over Christmas, and she used to give parties on Boxing Day, and I was yanked along because I was staying with some people near where she lived, and so we were all yanked along to the Boxing Day party, and I was introduced to her, and she said, Pearson, you're not Savanita Pearson, are you? And I said, well, yes, Prime Minister, I probably am. I want to talk about it. So she sat me down and took the whole thing, and so that's how I met her. And as I say, she would have made me Minister of State Education to deal with the teacher training aspect.
Was that? Can you explain that? So was that? So you've met her there, and was it because she was impressed because of your willingness to fight?
Yes,
against corruption.
She wanted to know about the story because she used to get bored in the summer. She used to go down to the Mediterranean and everything, and the story was sort of out and about then, and she wanted to know what really happened. I mean, so I told her, and because of that, she wanted me, and also I told her about what was going on in teacher training in the polytechnic sector, and.
Can you explain just so people understand what was going on in teachers training?
Well, it had been taken over by Marxism, really, and it came from in 1967 actually. Crossland was the education minister and the sort of mission statement of the polytechnic teacher training departments was to permeate the whole curriculum with issues of gender, race, and class. I mean, this came from the Soviet Union, but by the time it got in as a serious disease into, it never really came to effect. I mean, if you want to change a culture, you start with the people who are training the teachers, and then it takes 15, 20 years to feed through the system. And so by the time the Crossland reforms passed through, and say I joined the CNA in 1983, but by 1985, I'd seen enough to take it all to Margaret, and then she she was going to make me an education minister, as I say, but she got sacked, and John Major wouldn't touch it.
Can I ask, when you took this to Margaret Thatcher,
Yeah.
you've explained what's going on in the education system, as in they're attacking the culture through the education system. What did she say?
She understood it immediately, and talking to her much later about it, she said that she knew that she'd been an education minister in 1972, you see, and so she felt rather guilty that she hadn't done something about it in 72 because she spotted it and didn't really take it on, and so she knew it was.
This is as far back as that.
Yeah. Well, it started going in as a sort of poison in 67, as I say, under Crossland. 72 she was educated, I think, but this was by now, you know, by the time I reported it to her, 1990, something like that. Wow. In 1989, and she said, you know, you've got to go and deal with this. We can't go on with this. I'm going to make you, in a reshuffle at Christmas, I'm going to make you Minister of State for Education with special responsibility for teacher training and reporting directly to me. And I said, that's great, Prime Minister. And how long will I have? And she said, well, you can have 1 hour a month. And so I said, yeah, okay. So the New Year's honours came and all that in 1990, and so I went into the Lords as she was kicked out. And so then, as I say, John Major wouldn't touch it, wouldn't go anywhere near upsetting academe and all these ghastly universities and polytechnics. Actually, teacher training was largely a polytechnic matter. And so I was then a Conservative peer. They said, you've got to do something. So we want you to join the European Select Committee. And so I said, okay, I'll join the European Select Committee, and hadn't the faintest idea what it was about. But I thought I'd better read the treaties of Rome. The latest, there were a sort of series of treaties, you know, one after another, taking more and more power away from the nation state, from the national democracies, and passing it to the centre in Brussels.
So what is the treaties of Rome?
Well, the treaties of Rome are what set up the European Union, really. And they're pernicious documents. I mean, the idea came from Jean Monnet, and it was when I think 1957 the thing was set up. And it's perfectly clear they were set up in order to destroy national democracies and pass the powers of national democracies to the centre, to Brussels, to the European Union. And so I became a sort of rabid Eurosceptic when I read these treaties, you know, one after another. And at the time, the Maastricht Treaty was in draft. And
the what treaty?
The Treaty of Maastricht.
Which is what?
Was the sort of final nail in the coffin of the independent nations, of the independent democracies.
It's what they all signed up to.
And that's where I saw, you know, how really bad, evil, really, the European Union is from the start. It was founded upon a lie, which was that the European Union, had brought peace to Europe, which was absolute nonsense, because the war ended in 1945 and NATO kept the peace in Europe right through. And so it's a lie they still peddle. The people who like the European Union will still tell you that the European Union kept the peace in Europe. But it's complete rubbish.
And they use that lie to sell themselves so that people can support it?
Yeah, and the concept is, that, and there was a slight justification of the original idea, which was that national democracies, in this case Germany and Italy, had actually caused the Second World War and all the rest of it, and therefore the national democracies had to be got rid of and replaced by this central bureaucracy, really, which is what the European Union is, and you know, thank God we're out of the damn thing.
So just to confirm, before you're set on this path of Euroscepticism, You were actually given a lordship then by 1990, and because Margaret Thatcher had seen cultural Marxism take over the education system,
Yes.
she understood it and she wanted you to tackle it. But then as soon as she gets kicked out, you then can't tackle it under John Major, so then you're put into this position, which is what's put you on the path of Euroscepticism.
Yes.
What do you think, sitting here now, all these years on, we'll get onto Euroscepticism, we'll get onto UKIP, we'll get onto all of it, but sitting all these years on, if Margaret Thatcher in 1990 was allowed to address what now I guess people are calling wokeism, she wanted to address it in the 1990s in the education system. By that not happening, we've had another 10, 20, 25 years of indoctrination within an education system of sex, of gender,
race, and class.
So we're sitting now, 25 years later, if this could have been addressed under Margaret Thatcher with what she wanted, do you think that
none of it would have happened?
This country would look very different?
It would look, there wouldn't be sort of wokerism, gender dysphoria,
if she had
people pretending that they want to be a boy or a girl or the other way around or something. And I do sort of scan it, but I don't really get it. But there's an awful lot of stuff out there of people getting really excited about the simple facts of life.
Which is crazy. It's just to know that's what she wanted doing. Well, just while we're on Margaret Thatcher as well, with the current state of the country, you knew her personally. What do you think she'd say now about where we're at? Because I've seen her speeches on immigration, I've seen her speeches on illegal immigration. Would she have been fearful? Would she have been coward like most political leaders?
Oh no, she wouldn't have. She'd have attacked it. I think she would. What would worry her most about our present political class and commentators and all that thing is that they don't believe in anything. They don't really, nothing deep beyond them drives them. They are obsessed with the latest tittle-tattle in the press coverage, the this, the that, and the rest of it. And I think I've done a sort of dictum on it, that publicity is like money. It is a good servant, but a bad master. And the trouble is, one of the troubles as I see our present society, is that publicity has become an end in itself. And everyone is vying for the latest bit of gossip here or the latest something there, and there's no, you tell me, what do they believe in?
I don't think they know. Yeah, that's what I mean. I don't think they know.
There is still,
they change like the wind when it changes.
But and Christianity, unfortunately, I think is rather on retreat. Maybe I'm unpopular for saying that, but where is onward Christian soldiers? It's just not there. And the church is giving into wokery on every front, because it's like, as far as I can see, because they think that's the way to go. And so nobody is fighting it. I think very few people probably would dare to say what I've just said, but I couldn't care less, really. Don't affect me.
Why does that make you different? We'll get on to lots of questions you've asked the government, you've had discussions. What is it that makes you different to every other single person, unfortunately, in the House of Lords and the House of Commons, in the sense that you don't seem to care, you're willing to say what you think?
Well, I'm very, very privileged. I don't depend on my seat in the Lords for, my way of life. I made a bit of money when my company went public in 1984.
When you say went public, on the stock market?
Yeah, the stock market, yes.
Okay, so you floated your company?
Yes, in 1984, yeah. And so I'm very, very privileged. I also live in the wilderness in Scotland, and that refreshes the human spirit. And I don't know. I don't know. I can't really answer your question except that none of it bothers me. And I did one important thing I think is that, and it's on the record elsewhere. I did have quite a powerful religious experience in 1977 when I was having an operation on both legs to have the varicose veins removed, and the paralyzing drug which was actually curare, invented by the South American Indian. The paralyzing drug worked, but the gas cylinder failed. And so although I was paralyzed, I realized that the anesthetic was wearing off, and it did it off and off and off. And, that becomes quite interesting after a bit. And but I was very lucky because it became a sort of religious experience, because I said, oh my God, nobody's going to believe this. And this amazing voice came back and said, oh, but they don't believe in God either, do they? And so I said, well, yes, but maybe not, but I do. And so it was a powerful religious experience, which ended up in the light. And thousands of people have had them, but they do give you a view, an aspect of where we are now.
Explain that a little more. When you say religious experience, so you've had an operation.
Yeah.
Were you worried about being paralysed? Worried about dying?
Well, no. The anaesthetic failed.
Yes.
So
The pain.
the paralysing drug,
Yep.
curare, that worked. So I couldn't move, couldn't do anything, couldn't blink an eyelid, couldn't lift a little finger saying, yeah, something's going wrong.
But you can feel it all.
Yeah, you start to feel it as the anaesthetic wears off. But the gas mask, I had a row with them later. I could have sued them, but I didn't bother. The gas mask failed. So there was no, although the original jab they give you with knocks you out, and then they use a paralysing drug, curare, to paralyse you, make sure you're completely paralysed, so you don't twitch or do something when they're cutting, something. And I, came to under the thing, and I could tell them later. I could tell them about the conversation they'd been having, and because they didn't want to believe it. And then they were scared stiff I was going to sue them, and I said, I'm not going to sue, I couldn't care less, because actually it was a rather wonderful experience. I'm very glad to have had it, thank you very much. And but then they did admit that the gas mask had failed.
Was you religious before this?
Mm-hmm.
Was you religious?
Not so much. Basic sort of Church of England, really, up and down.
And you become an adamant believer more after this?
Yes, oh yes, I think I spend quite a lot of time now since then thinking about eternal things, of which I think there are only three, really, which are good, the void, and evil. Those are the only three really eternal things. And evil can only work its purpose on this tiny little pinprick of a planet, through us, through humanity. You cannot get evil unless humans are one way or another responsible. It's not the same as natural disasters, earthquakes, and that, they're very destructive, but they're not actually evil. Yeah. So I think we should talk more about these things, and certainly the violent end of Islam is evil. It's as simple as that, really. Islamism.
I'll get on to Islam. So you've become a Eurosceptic. You become leader of UKIP at one point.
Yes, I did.
Because you've read you've understood the European Union. You believe Britain needs to free itself.
Yes. So I joined UKIP. I mean, Nigel Farage was really the hero of all that. But yeah, I joined. Became leader of UKIP, which I hated, wasn't very good at. But what I wanted to achieve, and I saw UKIP as the vehicle to achieve it, was a referendum on our membership, because I was convinced that if we got a referendum on our EU membership, the British people would vote it out. And they did. Not by much, but they did. And David Cameron, you see, granted the referendum because he was a passionate Europhile, and he actually thought the British people would vote to stay in the European Union. I mean, the only remarkable thing is that the balance was quite close. I think, I can't remember what it was, but it was anyway.
52, I think.
48 to 52, something like that. But and that's a great thing. That what do we want? What do I want out of it? I simply wanted the British people to be able to elect and dismiss those who make their laws. Simple, you'd have thought. And that's what the European Union takes away from you. Because since we joined the European Union in whenever it was, 57, I think there was one new law every day, 14,000 new laws or pieces of legislation imposed on the British people by the machine in Brussels, which doesn't go through any form of democracy. It's the European Commission, well, the Parliament very often, the European Parliament, which can't do anything, it's a complete waste of space. It's a sort of democratic fig leaf on the project. But the way the project works is that the Commission imposes on the members legislation which they can do nothing about. When I sat on the Lord's Select Committee, we made a bit of a fuss about this, and so we were allowed to consider, I think the word was scrutinise, European legislation. We could take a piece of legislation from Europe and scrutinise it and discuss it and call for witnesses and feel terribly grand and all that. But we couldn't do anything about it. We couldn't stop it. Not a single piece of European legislation
can be stopped.
Has ever been stopped. And it can't be. And that's the idea. Yeah.
And what's David Cameron like? What's your opinion of David Cameron?
David Cameron,
because he's now back in politics.
I don't know him very well. I've known him on and off for years. I mean, you know, I wish him well, and he does his best, I think. Yes, and he's now foreign secretary or something, and I think he's doing quite well at that. But he we got the referendum because David thought they'd. He thought the people would. You know.
You've become a Eurosceptic, Mr. Pearson. How can I?
You're a realist.
You're a realist, yeah. You're a realist, which Nigel Farage went on and led a lead and won.
Yes.
At what point did you become knowledgeable about Islam? How did that come about? Because you've asked a lot of questions. I've seen you in Parliament. You're one of the only people. I've seen the reaction you receive when you ask these questions as well.
Yes, yes.
But what led you down that path? How did that come about?
I can't remember whether was there a specific event, Peter. Can you remember that led me to? There is a touch point somewhere, but I can't quite remember where it was. I mean, it was simply that. You know, I knew enough about Islam. I could see that you know the violent side of Islam is extremely bad news, and so I started asking questions. I wanted to debate on it really, and I wrote a paper which is 2 pages long about Islam and circulated it. And it was a bit of a hit. It went to millions of copies in India and places like that.
What year was this?
2022.
Okay.
Yeah. October 22. And it still stands up as a paper. I mean, you could buzz it out if you wanted. It's only 2 pages.
Yep.
And
is that the paper there? Can I have a look at it?
Yeah.
So you write this. This is why can't we talk about Islam? Because that's the question you've been asking. Can we talk about Islam? I've seen you.
Yes.
This memo is about Islam and Islamism. It's not about peaceful Muslims.
Yeah.
Goes on. Okay.
I mean, they have it, Tommy, and see if you wanted. People can send it. It's been very widely.
Can you explain what this is without me reading it? Can you just explain what it is to people?
Well, it's bullet points.
Yep.
About Islam, and you know which is advancing all over the planet. In Nigeria, whole of Africa, Nagorno-Karabakh, etc., Islam is advancing. And Western civilization is disintegrating because it's got to that sort of stage and retreating. And as part of Western civilization, I'm afraid the church is weak. And I think Christianity has a fundamental flaw in telling one to turn the other cheek and all that and love your neighbor. It's absolutely wonderful, but not if you're dealing with people like these who simply bank it and carry on and kill you anyway. So Islamism is very, very serious. I think we've probably lost. I don't see how, at the moment, I don't see how Western, well, the French are fighting back, the Dutch are beginning, the Swedes. It may not be all over, but purely on the birth rate, Muslims are going to be in charge of, I think, 9 or 10 English local authorities within about 8 years, because their birth rate is very, very much higher than ours.
And why is that? In fact, as you've just spoke there, it's recalled me to...
Well, Muhammad had 2 or 3 wives, and they're allowed 4 wives, I think, something like that, and they each have 2 children. So an awful lot of Muslim men are having 8 children, which we're not so good at, really.
I think 7 they have on average in France. I think the figures in France are insane. I think Macron, he's trying to do something about it. At least he's recognised it, and so on. But that's why Wilders is such a hero, because he understands it completely. That's why Wilders won the Dutch elections. So it's not a hopeless. There is a sort of fight back. When you started speaking there, it reminded me, because when I first started my activism in 2009, I watched a speech from you in Washington, and because my mum thought I was not mad. My mum was like, Stephen, because there was a lot of problems happening at the time. And after watching your speech, I think it changed my mum's opinion. You spoke about this being the most pivotal point in our country's history in your speech.
Yes.
You delivered a speech where you said that because of the Islamisation, we're at a very pivotal point where we're going to be of no turning back.
Yeah.
Could you briefly explain that? What if the public were listening to this, and some of them are downplaying the danger of the Islamisation?
Yes.
What would you say?
Well,
to
if you're
them?
allowed to talk about it at all, I mean, where the Muslims have been so clever is that they've invented this word Islamophobia, and anything you say about Islam at all, anything, can we discuss it? What about the example of Muhammad? Not so good.
Well, why is it not so good? What is the example
because
of
Muhammad, when he moved from Mecca to Medina in 622, and 5 years later, his new religion, which was Islam, had built up enough that he took over the whole place. And
peacefully?
No, he ordered the Quraysh Jews, a tribe of Jews, refused to go along with it, and he killed 600 of them in one afternoon. This is this man of peace. And I don't think that's challenged historically.
No, it's not. They accept it. They all cheer about it. In fact, on the Palestinian, you hear Kayeba, Kayeba. They're chanting the name of the village.
Oh, are they?
In all the marches.
Really?
People don't understand what they're saying. See, I watched a march coming through Luton, and they're all chanting in Arabic. And I thought, what are they chanting? And there was thousands of them.
Yes.
So I looked it up. And then that's when I come across this.
Yes, okay.
He beheaded 600 Jews in one day.
Yeah.
And that night
he got rid of the whole tribe. And there was a bit more to it. They refused to join his raiding parties, because this man of peace based in Medina was making quite a lot of money it was a central of the various trade routes of the time. And so he and his people were raiding these trade routes and keeping the camels and bumping off the rest of them and so on.
By raiding, you mean robbing?
But I mean, Muhammad was a man of war. I mean, there's no... To say that his religion is a religion of peace is, well, it's nonsense, really, I'm afraid.
So he introduced...
I mean, Islam, there are a lot of... I don't want to be nasty or negative or rude about, the good ones we've got. And those are the ones we've got to encourage. And there are a lot. The Association of British Muslims in Manchester, etc. They are all over the country. But those are the ones we've got to really get behind. Those are the ones we should be encouraging. And what we should do at the same time is monitor the mosques and the madrasas, the schools, and we should imprison or deport the violent Muslims, violent imams. Now, we should be doing it now, but we're not. We're not even looking. The government doesn't even know how many mosques we've got, because I've asked them.
45 in Luton.
Well, there's 2,000 about, we think, something like that. So it is, all I wanted to do for some time is, you can't do anything about this if you can't talk about it. And when you talk about it, it should be a general discussion, and we should be absolutely on the side of the good guys, of which there are, most of them are good guys, but there are an awful lot of bad ones too.
Can I ask you a question? Are the good guys, when you say the good guys, are the good Muslims following to the word, the scripture of Islam?
Well, that's where you see if
or are they just good Muslims? Are they just good people?
Well, they interpret the Quran in a way which is peaceful, which takes a bit of doing. They're ignoring the 104 verses, really, which instruct Muslims to kill or generally
to subdue non-Muslims.
Subdue, really, non-Muslims. So they are doing that, but I think it's too late now. We can't sort of turn the clock back. We can't. What we've got to do is make sure that when they are in charge of the various local authorities, it is the mildest form of Islam, with which there's no problem, and they're good people. And where you sort of draw the line between them and the baddies is very different, very difficult to,
Ed Hussein, me and you spoke before the cameras were on about Ed Hussein. Ed Hussein gave a statistic.
Sorry?
Ed Hussein?
Yes.
Ed Hussein is an ex-former extremist who's now...
Yes.
He wrote an in-depth study.
Good, Among the Mosques.
Among the Mosques.
Yes, very good book.
And what did that say in his book?
Well, he said that most of the mosques were all right, but I think about a quarter of them really weren't. I'm not sure he really dealt with the madrasas. I can't remember. But anyway, he's gone to live in America. And
has he given up?
No, I don't think so. But it's extraordinary, as you say, that I'm the only person who's been trying to raise this. It's absolutely extraordinary, really, because you would have thought. I understand the Commons. The Muslim vote is so strong now that in so many constituencies that almost no member of the Commons can really, because they've all got votes.
Can we just make a point of that? You're saying the Muslim vote is that strong now. Only 5% of the UK are deemed to be Muslim, 5 to 8%. So if it's that strong now, that it's silencing any criticism or discussion from politicians, you believe that may be the reason why they're not talking out or asking questions. As that demographic doubles every 10 years, when we get to 20 or 30% Muslim population,
game's over. We'll be an Islamic country. But I mean, Western civilization is disintegrating anyway, because that's what civilizations do. Empires rise and wane. As I say, the Greeks, the Romans, etc., the Egyptians, whatever you want. That is sort of happening, I think, really. Islam is going to take over the planet. It's as simple as that.
So
the only question is, what sort of Islam?
Is that the only question? Is that the
only question?
No, not is that the only question. But for me, Islam can never take over Great Britain. It can never be allowed to. That's my opinion. Is that has to be fought at every single level to prevent.
Well, all you can do at the moment then is, what can the government do at the end of it? All we can do now is recognise the problem, talk about it, imprison or deport our violent ones. We ought to be monitoring every single mosque in the country, every single madrasa. We ought to be finding out what's going on. And under the Terrorism Act, actually doing something, but we're not. The government doesn't even know how many mosques there are. Couldn't care less. It's, I don't know, or they don't want to be accused about Islamophobia or whatever.
Do you think it's because the government planned for 4 years?
Sorry?
Do you think it's because our government and our political parties are planning for the next 4 years, whereas Islam's planning for the next 100 or 1,000?
Yes, well,
and it has been since it enacted.
I don't know. Maybe I'm talking complete nonsense, and none of this will happen. In which case, hallelujah, quite frankly.
It looks like it's happening.
I'm afraid it does.
Can I ask you? You just briefly spoke on Geert Wilders, Geert Wilders, who has just won the election with the highest count in Holland.
Yes.
Years ago, you invited him to the UK. Why?
Yes, because I was just we're just having a drink with a few peers in the Bishop's Bar in the Lords, and I heard about this man who had been been due to speak in the European Parliament, and he'd been banned. He'd been told to stand down. He wasn't allowed to go to the European Parliament, and this is some time ago. Well, it's when you got organised, and so I just said, oh, well, this must be a really good man. If he's been banned from the European Parliament, let's have him over here. I invited him. I invited to come over here and give a speech to Lords and Commons in a committee room, and generally I was.
Had he created a film, Fitna? Is that what it's to do with?
Yes, Fitna. Yes, he actually came over to show his film Fitna.
Okay.
Yeah, and I remember as we came, it was quite a thing. I took him over to a press conference in Abbey Gardens, and the English Defence League and many others.
I was there.
You were, but you've been contained.
We had a big rally in support.
But yes.
I want to go to before that. So before he come,
Yes.
when he first time, I think you first of all tried to get him to come.
Yes.
And I think did the government block his
Yes, the
entrance?
Home Secretary
Secretary
turned him back from the airport. Yeah.
So
And
Wilders,
he was sent back.
a Dutch politician.
He was a Dutch member of Parliament. So, well, you know, I made a fuss about that. I went to court on it actually, and won. Well, they conceded. I'm not sure he got because it wasn't legal. Jackie Smith, she was called, very second-rate little woman.
So that's the lady who went to
was
lower the age of sex to 12.
She was posing as Home Secretary, I think. Well, she was the Home Secretary, and she decided to turn him back.
Why?
Because he was not conducive to the public good. In other words, that if he came over here, there'd be riots and all the rest of it.
What?
Which was complete nonsense.
Was
Anyway, he went back, and I went to court to challenge this thing, but it never really got there because she crumbled before. Although the judgment, I think we did get saying that you know, the decision to ban him was without legal foundation or something, and so he then turned around and he did come back, and I got him to address, you know, come and talk to both houses of Parliament and all that. You know, people who wanted to come, purely voluntary. A lot of people did come and asked him questions and so on.
Can I ask you, because at the time you say Jackie Smith banned him, was she under pressure? Wasn't there another lord, who made comments towards the government?
Oh yes, there was. I can't remember who he was, but
Lord Ahmed.
Ahmed, I think he was called. Yes, and Lord Ahmed threatened to put 10,000 Muslims into an army to march on the House of Lords and the Parliament and destroy it and all that. And Black Rod actually told me this, that they'd received this threat. I said I should ignore it. They can't anyway. He did put a lot of people together. I mean, there were thousands of people jumping up and down here on College Green.
Just to make that point again, Lord Ahmed, who had a peerage, threatened the government that they would overrun Parliament with an army of Muslims and then Jackie Smith crumbled and banned him.
Yes, that's right.
So that is mob. That's surrendering.
Then she uncrumbled because we got him, and he came, and he showed his film Fitna and gave a few talks. I mean, he's a most remarkable man, Wilders. He's not really easy, necessarily to work with because he's such a strong individual. I only wish he could put a government together in Holland now. But he won. You know, the Dutch people said, "Thank you very much, you're numero
What does that say to you? When you invited him, he didn't have a large following. He had a very small following in politics at that time in 2010. In 2023, there was an election, and he just won the election.
Yes, he did. Yes.
Geert Wilders, who has called for the banning of the Quran.
Yes,
he's called for the deportation of
yes.
And he won on that.
And the Dutch people, the Dutch aren't stupid. I mean, and they're a very civilized nation, very like us in many ways. They've got a sense of humour, and I think the only European nations with a sense of humour, us, the Dutch, and the Russians. Funny enough, they have a sense of humour. So the Dutch are very, very old allies and friends and all that, they voted him. I mean, they've got a sort of system that doesn't produce clear government, does it really?
They've got 20 different coalition parties that have to form a government instead of the major two.
Yeah.
Is that better, though? Do you think that's better?
No.
Is proportional representation better?
No, I think we want to stick to what we've got, really. Even if, we're obviously going to go through a very uncomfortable period of socialism, but the Conservatives have been in power for 12 years. They haven't really done anything much.
Have they?
So people are fed up, and the thing changes.
Can I ask? Do you know what happened to Lord Ahmed now?
Well, I do. Funny enough, he got in trouble on a motorway, I think, didn't he?
No, he was convicted of, if I remember rightly, of raping little boys and girls and robbing them.
Oh no, that I didn't remember. Yeah.
Okay.
I always forget that sort of thing.
Whilst
He was arrested for first of all, he was arrested for speeding on a motorway, I think, and then I'd forgotten he was he convicted?
He was convicted recently.
But he's a very unfortunate, nasty man, really.
While we're on that, I want to talk about grooming. I've watched you ask questions in Parliament about grooming, and I've watched the reaction from the rest of the people in Parliament, which I found absolutely unbelievable. But can you just explain in attempting to talk about Islam, in attempting to ask any of these questions in government buildings, what's the reaction been like for you?
Well, it's negative, really. I mean, there are quite a lot of peers will come up and say, well done asking that. We're right behind you. To which I say sometimes, sometimes feels they're quite a long way behind because you're not actually there. It's a great privilege to be able to ask questions. Written questions are terribly valuable because government has to answer them, and so I haven't done it for some time. I haven't asked a question for some time, but I've got to come back to it. Yeah, it's negative, but and the sort of atmosphere, because I sit at the back of the Labour benches, because then I can see what's going. Because I'm non-aligned, I'm not a member of a political party. I can see what's going on with the Conservative opposite. I sit at the back of the Labour. They're not too happy having me there, but there it is. But the Liberal Democrats are sort of there, and I'm afraid I rather enjoy being intensely disliked by Liberal Democrats. Especially when they're sort of en masse, So it's probably an unfortunate trait, but I think it's quite fun. And some of them individually, very nice, very nice.
I want to ask you something now. You briefly just mentioned Russians to do with their humour. You had a relationship with a Russian author.
Well, the Russian
author, who I've seen him described by Jordan Peterson as the best since Shakespeare. Can you explain to me, because I can't even pronounce his second name, it was Aleksandr
Solzhenitsyn.
You was very supportive of Soviet dissidents yourself.
Yeah.
Can you just take me through that story of how you become in contact with him and why?
Well, I can't remember how I started the Soviet thing. I mean, I was fortunate. Well, I was fortunate enough to meet him in 1983, because he came over to this country to collect the Templeton Prize for Religion, which he'd won, and so I met him then. Also because he didn't know what to do with his cheque and everything, so I managed. It was £157,000, which he wanted to get to his network of dissidents in the Soviet Union. So I sort of helped with that. And
when you say he wanted to get his cheque, so let's understand, he was
awarded the Templeton Prize for Religion.
Previously, he'd fought on the front line.
He was living in Vermont already by then with his family, but he had to come over here to get the cheque, which he got from Prince Philip at Buckingham Palace in the morning, and a very, very short acceptance speech, which he wanted to send to his supporters, his movement in the Soviet Union. And
what for? What did he want to send them money for?
Well, because he had a network of people that needed money and support to stay alive, because they were being blackballed by the. But don't forget, this is 6, 7, 8 years before the wall came down. So it's quite. The Soviet Union was pretty rough in those days, and he'd been kicked out for his book One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich.
One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, and is that him talking about his time in a gulag?
Yes, and the Soviets misread it. They thought it was a critique of the West, but it wasn't. It was a critique of the whole Soviet system, really. And so Yeah, and he came over to get this prize, and when he was leaving Buckingham Palace, having been given this cheque, he said to the equerry who was taking him down the steps and everything, he said, and it is all right, isn't it, if I publish my little short acceptance speech that I've just made to Prince Philip. It's all right if I publish that as samizdat, underground literature, in the Soviet Union, isn't it? And this unfortunate flunky replied, oh no, Mr. Solzhenitsyn, you can't, this is totally private ceremony. You can't publish what you've just said to Prince Philip. And so, of course, the great man went through the roof and said, well, I feel let down, I wouldn't have come, I only came because I wanted to send this money to my networks underground in the Soviet Union. And so I'm going back now, I'm going back to Vermont now, which meant he was ducking his performance that evening. He was to make a speech at the Guildhall to the assembled great and good of the United Kingdom, and he was going to address them that evening. And he said, well, I'm not going to, I'm going back to, now. And and his wife, Natasha, who was, they were staying in Claridge's and I was living quite near there then, she came over to sort of commiserate and say, is there anything I can do, anything we can do and everything. And I was very lucky then because my father-in-law was just given up being private secretary to the Queen. And so I got hold of him, Martin Charteris, and I said, Martin, the balloon's gone up. The great man is going back to Vermont now, so I don't know what you're going to do about the Guildhall this evening. And 5 minutes later, Martin rang back and said, absolute nonsense. Of course he must publish it. Prince Philip, very, very keen that it should be published. So I relayed this to the great man, who relented and didn't go back to Vermont that evening and gave his address to the Guildhall and so on. So that's how I sort of met him. And then the one country in the world he'd wanted to visit was Scotland. And so I think he took the only 2 or 3 days holidays ever taken. We jumped on the sleeper the next night and spent 2 or 3 days in Scotland, which was wonderful. With you? Yes. He came to stay with me.
He came to stay with you.
He and Natasha.
So people can understand who he was and what he was fighting against at that time. What was happening at the time? What was the Soviet Union? Who was in control of it? And what were the lifestyles?
Well, I can't remember which awful man, Brezhnev or whatever they were called. Yeah. But the Soviet Union was, it was the Soviet Union. It was a terrible construct, which eventually, did collapse under Gorbachev, funnily enough. And I can't even remember which was the sort of, but it was total lack of freedom. The Soviet system is, famously lacking in individual liberty. If you mentioned, you didn't even have to say you thought the state was awful. If you were caught wanting to leave the Soviet Union, you were sent to the prison, the Gulag, for 8 years. Just saying you wanted to leave the Soviet Union carried 8 years in the Gulag. And of course the great man had been through it.
Because he was fighting for the Soviet Union as a soldier originally?
Yes, he was. He was a cavalry officer, and he fought for the Soviet Union, but he sent some letter which was critical of Stalin to a brother officer, which was intercepted, and so he was sent to the Gulag, and I think he was there for 8 years.
And the Gulag is where, so again, people understand, it's where people worked to death, basically.
Yes.
They were hard laboured, they died of they froze to death.
Yeah. The Gulag, but as a result of that, he wrote this book, the Gulag Archipelago, which was a world bestseller, which was explaining, what was happening there.
Because he was an important character in the downfall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, absolutely. He was probably the key character, I think, really.
Okay. So he's. Do you mind if I ask, what did you? Because and while we're on the Soviet Union, so I believe there were 60 million deaths of internal oppression this isn't including the world wars under Stalin.
I think that's something like that.
And under Mao, nearly 100 million. So can I ask, in our history and so the public understanding, communism's still celebrated here now in the West.
They're mad.
Communism's still celebrated. You've got 60 million, 100 million. There were 6 million Jews killed under Hitler, disabled and gypsies killed under Hitler.
That was fascism.
How come under Mao and how come under Stalin? How come in our education system? How come you don't think there's the warning that's given under that ideology that's resulted in all those deaths? What's your opinion of why we have many politicians and academics and professors who actually celebrate and support the ideology that resulted in that many deaths? Why do you think that is?
Human frailty. I don't know. They're idiotic people. I don't know. It's inexplicable, really.
Do you think in the education system, what Margaret Thatcher brought you into to oppose, that's allowed this idea to flourish? Marxism
hasn't gone away, and was definitely in our education system. I think it probably still is. But I'm not saying you shouldn't learn Marxism. We should learn about Marxism, learn what it is and everything, but we should also learn about capitalism. And that was my thing, that in the education system they were learning about Marxism, but no one was extolling or talking about...
Or the dangers of Marxism.
But no one was talking about the alternative capital. It simply wasn't being taught, really.
Can I ask if you even remember what... in those 2 days that you spent with Aleksandr, what did you discuss? What was he like as a character?
It was wonderful, great experience. We went we slipped up on the night sleeper, and he came and Natalia came too. And it was a bit like having the Prophet Isaiah to stay. I mean, he's an extraordinary man with a great sense of humour. Not at all a sort of... Everyone said he was difficult and bloody-minded. Not at all. And he very much enjoyed it. We went for a walk in the local pine forest once, and there was this huge ant heap on the ground like this, and all the ants scurrying all over the place. And Solzhenitsyn went and poked it like that, and all the ants scuttered around all over the place. One or two of them got into his beard because he was looking at them very closely. And he roared with laughter, and he said, "Socialism works, you see," which was the anti-socialism works. Yes, and and so we went for walks in the wilderness, which he loved, because he hadn't really been like that.
Okay, and because he'd been imprisoned as well, I guess.
Well, exactly. I mean, it was a great privilege, and he was very, very, very great. Well, he's one of the greatest figures of the 20th century. There's no doubt about that.
Can I ask you, on your personal life, Lord Pearson, you obviously married. You've had children?
Yes.
How many children?
3 daughters.
Did you send them to boarding school?
Yes. Well, one of them's got one of them has Down syndrome, so she has a rather sort of special education. Okay. But let me just think. Yes, I think the others went to... Sylvia went to St Mary's, Ascot, and then I can't remember.
From what age?
Zara, I don't know, 13, 14.
Okay, so you didn't send them at 7?
Oh, no.
Because of your experience? That's what I was curious.
Yes, of course. No, no. I mean, I think to be sent, to any form of boarding institution, when you're 7, you want to be with your mother, don't you, really? And I think they're much better now. I mean, I think that even if, children are sent to boarding schools when they're 8, 9, 10, whatever, the schools are much less authoritarian and much more cosy, much more, I think they probably are better. I don't know, I'm not in my,
What do you think the most important or most dangerous thing that faces Great Britain currently? What's the biggest danger to our country now?
Islam. Obviously, Islamism, sorry.
What's the difference between Islam and Islamism?
Well, Islamism is the violent sort, and Islam is supposed to be the mild sort, I think.
Are the violent parts of Islamism, are they fundamental to Islam?
Well, they're Islamic fundamentalists. I mean, they take the the verses of the Quran, the 100 verses, you know, they take them literally and seriously. And they take the murder of 600 Jews in one of, they take all that seriously and as a justification, you know, and they hate us really, I'm afraid. And I'm afraid they're going to, I can't see anything, I can't see us stopping them. Because at the moment, this sort of conversation is extremely rare.
There is no conversation, least of all from someone with your standing.
Well,
no one
standing,
but the reason why I think it's an incredibly important discussion, as I said, I showed my mum your speech, and I think it changed her opinion because of, probably because of the way you speak, probably because of your education, probably because of all these things. It was different to me saying it, saying, "Mum, look, what they're doing."
What was this, the thing in
This was
America?
the thing in Washington.
Washington,
It was you talking about how pivotal this moment is in our country's history and how important it is that we talk.
Yes. It was, I think that was the National Religious Broadcasters one, Jerry Johnson and Frank Gaffney. It's some years ago now, but nothing's...
What would you say to the politicians? There's probably members of Parliament who agree with your concerns, with our concerns, but they won't talk about it. What would you say if there was a member of Parliament watching this who is very sympathetic and understands the threat the country faces, but they're coward and they're bound by they're silent because of fear? Would you say that's the real Islamophobia? Would you say that because I say when I hear Islamophobia, I think there is Islamophobia and it's everyone's fear to talk about it.
A phobia is an unrealistic, isn't it? An unrealistic,
an irrational fear,
an irrational fear of something. And I mean, some of the certainly there must be a large number of members of the House of Commons whose, you know, Muslim vote is sufficiently powerful.
But is their seat in Parliament more important than the future of our nation and the safety of our children?
Well, but supposing they resigned and went off saying all the right things, I mean, what would they be replaced by? You know, it wouldn't... I don't see... I don't at the moment. I hope I'm being gloomy, but I don't see any way out. I don't see how Western civilization, which, as I say, in any case has reached maturity and all that sort of thing, kingdoms rise and wane. I don't at the moment see how it's going to resist takeover by Islam in the longer term.
Does that terrify you?
The power of the womb and the ballot box is what they talk about. They're quite open about it. All they've got to do is wait as their birth rate comes up, and I can't remember when it is, but in 7 or 8 years, you know, 9 English local authorities are going to be Muslim majority, and when they're Muslim majority, they will vote in a, you know, sort of Muslim-orientated council. Then what? We'll see. I mean, there's hope. I've got a grandson who says that he's got Muslims at school, and they don't believe in any of it. The sort of 18-year-old and all the rest of it, and you know, and if the next generation of Muslims is not going to be so aggressive and bloody-minded, then there's hope. So
we just saw a Douglas Murray poll recently that they released from the Henry Jackson Society that said 33% of British Muslims, and it was the younger ones who wanted this, want to implement Sharia law.
Yes, I saw that. Yes.
What do we do about that?
Well, I think it was rather frightening, that figure. It was 30% of British, they want to live under Sharia law. Well, perhaps they more or less had to say that because that's what being a Muslim is, isn't it?
They're good Muslims.
Mm. Well, but at least, you know, if we start now, it's a rare privilege to be allowed to talk about this at all. And I may have got lots of things wrong, but as long as we're not allowed to talk about it, as soon as you say anything, they pounce on you with this brilliant word, Islamophobia, then, you know, we're just sliding on down until they take over.
What do you see happening? Do you see the current political situation with the Conservative Party? Have they failed to be conservative? Is that why they're losing support?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, they haven't. I mean, the immigration. I mean, where have they done something of which Margaret would have approved? I can't think of anything. But that's why reform is coming up now, I think, and there's some very, very good people there.
Can I ask you if you see anyone in the political spectrum, any people, is there any politician out there that you see that could be brave enough to lead this country to safety? Is there anyone that will stand up and fight the decline? Is there anyone that's going to...
Well, yes. I mean, he probably won't thank me, but certainly if you look at the reform, people in reform, Ben Habib, for instance.
I like Ben Habib.
He's a very, very old friend of mine.
Okay.
And he's a very, very good man, but he does other things and so on. Richard Tice is very good, I think, but he's not as good as Ben. In that whole reform or reform, as I call it, you know, something is emerging there, and if what reform stands for becomes what this country is, then you know, it may take 2 elections, and we may have to go through a socialist thing in the meantime. But I think that they probably will. They probably will come. Anyway, he'd be my man.
Ben Habib.
Ben. Really,
what about Suella Braverman? What's your opinion of Suella Braverman?
I don't know her. I've read I've never met her.
Okay.
I'm always nervous of commenting about people if one hasn't met them. You know.
But you know Ben Habib personally, so you can sit and you can. Okay, so as someone who's known him his life, you see that he would be willing to stand up.
Yeah.
He's not. Many politicians are seen as.
No.
One more question, Lord Pearson, which you've been probably in amongst. Would you describe the people in the House of Lords as the elite? I think many people growing up would see these as the elite.
Yes, I think that's what people think of it as. I mean, you look at the Houses of Parliament and the Lords and Big Ben and all that, and the red benches and so on and so forth. So I think it is a sort of elite. But like all elites, when you join them, when you're part of them, it sort of loses its elitism because everyone's, you know, equal there. So I think the Lords. People talk about abolishing the Lords, and I'd find it hard, although I don't agree with a lot of them, but to get the selection of people that is actually in the Lords at the moment. This is why the debates are so good and all that sort of thing. It's very difficult to think of a system of electing people to the upper house. I mean, we'll get a few idiotic old vice-chancellors and things like that. I mean, we don't want that. And the hereditary pairs are very, very good. I mean, and it'd be great. We shouldn't really have got rid of the other lot, but you've got people like Lord Howe, Lord Glen Arthur. You've got really first-class people, you know, slaving away, you know, who are hereditary peers. So, you know,
we hear a lot about the deep state. If you've been inside Parliament, House of Lords, you know all these people. You've gone to the same schooling system. In your opinion, is there a deep state that's
I don't know what do you mean by a deep state?
By deep state, I mean, is there a element of, like, when Liz Truss has been ousted, when Liz Truss was ousted, she made a comment saying that even as Prime Minister, you don't have any control. Yeah, you're not in control, the banks are in control. She's recently in a podcast said this. The select committee who decides who's going to be a member of Parliament are the groups in control. Many of the people this is the allegation, many of the people that are then elected have maybe
I think probably the civil service.
The civil service
is too large and too influential. And I mean, even Margaret used to say when she wanted to get something through, she had to get up every morning and push it through. Because if the blob, the civil self-service, as I call them sometimes.
Priti Patel said the same. She said she wanted to tackle green when she couldn't. The civil service blocked her.
Who said that?
Priti Patel.
Yes, exactly.
Even when she wanted to implement things and she couldn't.
It's all very well. There you are as a minister, and everyone kowtowing, yes, minister. But actually, they just do what the hell they want. You've got to be really, really. I mean, Margaret said in her day that if she wanted to get something through, she had to summon the people every morning at whatever it was, 10 o'clock or something, saying what has happened to get this through. I mean, it's a sort of, in a way it's a good thing because it stops politicians doing things that are sort of completely wild and idiotic. But in another way it's a bad thing because it stops, it stops politicians fulfilling their promises for a start.
Would you say there's a darker side? Would it be possible with the allegations of some people believe is there's a darker side to politics where people have special interests, where many of the politicians are then under the control, whether it be for their degeneracy or certain bits of information that can be got on them. And look at the current DUP leader, who's currently now has been charged with sexual permissions against children. Is there a level? Is that something that's a reality? Have you ever heard discussions in the House of Lords, in the circles that you move in? No. Okay.
No. I mean, I don't know how to. No.
The only reason why I'm asking is we'd have no knowledge of what goes on inside these buildings.
I know nothing like that really.
Okay.
I mean, it's the discussions are all too open. Everything, and is there some sort of secret body or cabal or something that? Yeah. Well, I mean, I was accused with Caroline Cox and others of by some people called Hate Not Hope, I think they're called. Who went big just because we have a meeting every 6 weeks and so on to consider Christian matters and other matters and so on. It's not secret. If it was secret, couldn't care less. Maybe it's there, but I'd be very surprised because I think I'd at least smelt it, wouldn't I?
That's why I was curious. I have trust in you. A lot of people, I think, will have trust in you. Do you think?
I don't think there is.
I'll keep on one last thing. Do you think Donald Trump wins the next election?
Yes.
Do you think the world needs him to win the next election?
Well, I think it would be quite sporting.
Lord Pearson, I'd like to thank you for speaking up on my behalf at times.
Oh, yes.
You've shown me support. You've been.
Yes.
We had here letters. You've got the Tommy file of letters that you've received.
Yes. Well, I know you can't just take that away, Peter. We can't let that go.
These are letters. Dear Lord Pearson, I'm writing with a heavy heart with the unjust arrest of Tommy Robinson last Friday. I don't know if
that's the public writing in.
This is the public. Thank you for your robust stance regarding the imprisonment of Stephen Lennon, which many people feel to be unjust. So these are letters that you've received because you've spoke up. I'm a semi-retired dentist, no political affiliation through perhaps the application of classic liberal might apply. Might I congratulate you on your principled stance regarding Tommy and the suppression of information regarding Muslim rape gangs. By raising the Tommy Robinson issue, you have shown that some lords, yourself only, we think, have the interest of this country and its majority at heart. Yeah. So these are people who have took the time to write to you. This reminds me of my prison letters. Right. To write the time to you to thank you for standing up. So I wanted to say a personal thank you as well. It's very rare that anyone.
I always end our conversations by Tommy saying, "You've got to be good. Be as good as you can be."
I tried.
You mustn't be. Don't be naughty because don't be naughty unnecessarily. Because they can get you on that.
I know. Sometimes I think the difficult...
I mean, he never listens, does he? That doesn't mean in a way we don't want you to listen to it. We don't want you to be different. But anything I can do, I mean, it's a tremendous privilege to be able to ask the government questions, written questions, and it's a great privilege to be able to get up and say things. And I mean, I haven't been speaking much recently, but it's a great privilege to have it. And I think I'm happy to use it and to keep the Tommy show on the road.
Keep it on. I'm going to have one more question again. Do you think you're in the later part of your life, Lord Pearson?
What?
How old are you now?
81.
81. Do you think, this is where I worry, yeah? I worry because you are a lone voice in those buildings. Once you're not in those buildings, do you think anyone else is going to take the reins and ask the questions that need to be asked of the government and parliament regarding Islam, grooming gangs or any of these things? Can you see anyone else who has that?
Well, I suppose, funny enough, Caroline Cox, of course, does.
Caroline Cox has been another one.
She's wonderful.
She fights for the Muslim women who are oppressed within...
Yeah, well, she's got a bill going through Parliament which would make the present Sharia law, which is very negative for Muslim women in this country. It would make that illegal, but the government won't give it time because they're too frightened.
The government won't give it time to protect Muslim women.
They won't give Caroline Cox's bill time. No.
What does that say in itself?
I'm afraid that's right. And she's had goodness knows how many first readings when she gets up and does it, but it's never got as far as the second reading. It's extraordinary, really, because she's such a wonderful woman. She really is a heroine, and not all that well at the moment.
Okay, well, I've took enough of your time, Lord Pearson,
No,
so
I've taken yours.
I'm very grateful for your time. If you've watched this, if you've liked this discussion, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to sit in these positions, to have these discussions. These discussions are the most important discussions of this time. Not many people are willing to have them. Lord Pearson's one of them. Thanks for your time. Please like, share, and share this message everywhere. Thank you.
Thanks for your patience.
Carry on watching for more interesting guests. I'll talk to anyone. I'll debate anyone. I'll hear anyone's story. If you want to help me along that way, it's not free. I need your support. If you can support my family, that gives me my peace of mind. It means I can continue to do the work I do. You can do so at www.supporttommy.com. I appreciate every bit of support, as do my children. Gives me the ability to fly them out here to see me so I can stay in constant contact with them. I'm deplatformed and I'm censored, so I need you. I need you to share this content and make sure you stay tuned for upcoming weekly guests, interesting guests, exciting guests. I'm Tommy Robinson and this has been my podcast, Silence.